Bill Jackson were just a little bit older than I. You know, and in those days, 4 or 5 years made a big difference if you were in the 9th grade and they were in freshman in college or something like that. So I really didn't know them that well.
When Bill spoke at Moonbrook after the dedication, I don't know if you guys went up there or not.
No,
In the
I
swing?
didn't. I was not there.
He was talking about his dad, and at the end,
Yeah.
and I too, I had a little camcorder, I'm taking
Yeah.
filming this, and he broke up completely.
Oh, really?
It's
Is
really
that
poignant.
right? Is that
He was a
right?
guy that's
Yeah.
such a Wall Street
Yeah.
lawyer,
Super
and
Wall Street lawyer, yeah.
at the end he said, I
Mr.
hope you don't mind me being biased, but
Yeah.
I'm proud of my dad, and takes off his glasses and stops the speech.
Yeah.
Just really touching.
Touching, that's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
My goodness.
Well, after the statue was up, and incidentally, I think that's a terrific statue.
Totally.
It is good.
But I thought there ought to be something more there, so I scouted around and read a lot of Supreme Court opinions and stuff, and picked out a quote which I had, with the permission of the city or whoever, chiseled into a stone, which is now behind the statue. And I wrote Bill Jackson a note just to tell him, because the paper had an article about it, and I got a very nice letter back from him, which I probably have somewhere, but in one of my files. But yeah, I thought there ought to be some kind of a quotation. And incidentally, in doing that, and I didn't go into the Supreme Court reports or anything like that. I'd go to autograph books.
Yeah.
And Jackson has a lot of entries.
Mhm.
He was a terrific writer.
Mhm.
He's a terrific writer. Yeah.
What's the quote? Do you remember it?
I don't remember the quote, but it had to do with freedom of thought and minority opinions ought to be respected and that kind of thing.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah. I don't know what you'd say about some of the minority opinions today, but I think that was from was it the Seventh-day Adventists or one of those cases where they refused to salute the flag, or it was something like that,
Yeah.
and they were upheld, and Jackson wrote the opinion.
Mhm.
And I think this quote is from. I'll have to go by there and refresh my
Sure.
memory on that. Yeah. Yeah.
How did you mentioned you obviously you took the law exam,
Oh, yeah.
became a lawyer.
Yeah.
You said that's a story for another time. Now's a great time.
Well, his dad.
You went to Columbia Law School,
Yeah.
didn't you? Thought you did.
I graduated in '48, February of '48. You know, they used to run 3 semesters around
I sure
the
do.
whole calendar at that time.
Yeah.
So I graduated in 2 years, although I had 6 semesters, and came back here. I took the bar exam. I passed, and but I knew I wasn't going to practice law. I went in my firm. In fact, well, it wasn't quite in this building because we were then in Bank of Jamestown. We did move. But anyway, about a week after I was admitted, I get a phone call from your father, and he and my dad were
Big
you know,
buddies.
Big buddies. And he said, Miles, can you come over to City Court? I'd like to see you for a minute. So, of course, I went over. Well, there's City Court. It was then Surrogate's Court.
Mhm.
Hugh Badine.
Mm-hmm. Surrogate's
You
court.
remember him?
Sure, it was in the city court.
Yeah, in
chamber.
fact, it was in the City Court chamber,
Sure.
but your dad said, can you come over to Surrogate's Court? I want to see you for a minute. So I go over there, and your dad is appearing for some estate or other before Badine, and you probably didn't know Hugh Badine,
Hugh
but he
Badine.
was quite a guy,
He sure was.
quite a wit, low-key wit. And anyway, your dad steps up and he says, Judge Badine, of course, Judge Badine knew me or knew my father, and he knew who I was. But he said, I'd like to present Miles Lasser, who just admitted to the bar, and I'd like to nominate him as special guardian of John Doe or whatever that
Mhm.
estate was,
Mhm.
some kid probably in the family. Well, I didn't know what the hell a special, I never heard of it. I didn't know what the hell a special guardian was. You know, in law school, you take all these theoretical courses, you get down into the nitty gritty. So Judge Badine, you know, barely suppressing a smile, says, "Oh, well, glad to see you, Mr. Lasser. Of course, you know all the duties of a special guardian." With kind of a smirk on his lips. And I said, "Well, Your Honor, I'll have to refresh myself, or I don't know what the hell I said." But, and then I think your dad stepped in and he said, "Well, I'd like to move that this report be accepted, sign here," he said to me. And I signed.
That's about all there is to it anyway.
And
We've all been there.
and your dad, I don't recall whether he pulled this out of his pocket or his wallet or something. He said, "No, here's your fee." It was $10 or something like that. I should have framed it.
I hope he didn't pull it out of his pocket.
Yeah, that was the first and only legal fee I ever earned. But that was, and that's the only time I've ever appeared in court as an attorney.
That's
First and only time.
That's great.
How did your dad get here?
Well, my dad, our then firm, Seidman and Seidman, was founded in 1910 by an uncle of mine, and some of his brothers joined. And my father, who had graduated from NYU School of Commerce, night school, went to work for Seidman and Seidman in 1918 or something like that. And my mother, who was a Seidman, was working in the office at that time. I think she was a bookkeeper or something. And so they met, and things got romantic, and they were married in 1920. And I like to say, as a sentence for that, they sent him up to Jamestown to open an office. And the reason that they sent him to Jamestown was that in World War I, M.L. Seidman, who was the founder of the firm's next brother, Frank Seidman, F.E. Seidman, was with the War Production Board, or whatever it was called.
Mm-hmm.
And he was sent out to Grand Rapids because at that time, Grand Rapids, the biggest furniture manufacturing center, made airplanes. I mean, they were made of wood in those days, so their war product was airplanes.
Mm-hmm.
And Frank Seidman was out there, I guess, to look over things for the government or make sure things were going right. So he was out there 2 or 3 years, and he, of course, made a lot of acquaintances in the furniture industry. And in fact, he met his wife there, future wife there. In any event, when the war ended, the firm started an office, this second office in Grand Rapids. Well, at that time, Jamestown was next to Grand Rapids, the biggest furniture manufacturing area. So I guess they already had some contacts up here, clients or something. So
Sure.
they decided to open an office in Jamestown. And so my dad came up here in 1920 to open that office. And he was the first, I don't think he was a CPA when he first got here. I don't remember, but he soon became one, and he was the first one in the whole area. And by whole area, I go down into Pennsylvania, Warren and Smithport and Eldred and Olean, and I mean so that's really how he got a lot of help from people like your dad and Wilson Price.
He was a good guy to have on your side, I'll tell you.
Mhm.
Your dad was quite an advocate.
Yeah.
Had experience with him in tax court a couple of times.
did ya?
Oh, goodness.
I never appeared. I never was with him in tax court. Yeah. But there were several people who were quite helpful to him in getting the practice going. And your dad and Wilson Price were two of the leading ones.
I'll never forget one time we went to Buffalo, and it was an evaluation question in an estate tax return. And he listened for a little while and what this guy was saying, and finally he said, "You know something?" He said, "You just don't know what the hell you're talking about."
He did.
I just about
He
fell on the
did?
floor, you know. And we got up, we walked right out of the place.
Really?
Yeah.
I never heard that.
Oh, yeah. It was a little stronger
I'm
than
kind of
that.
surprised that my father, because he knew how to schmooze, and I'm surprised
So, I'm thinking,
that he would say that.
I'm thinking, boy, we sure booted that one, We're not going very far with this. A few days later, he called and he said, "Hey, if it's okay," he said, "we're going to settle this thing." And I think that we were within 10% of the value we used. It was a beautiful settlement. But I thought we'd have.
So his argument was very persuasive.
Yes,
huh?
for sure.
You don't know what the hell you're talking about.
I just about flipped.
I never heard that.
Yeah. He's quite something.
Well, Chautauqua Institution. Wilson Price and my father, Wilson Price having long been associated with the institution as counsel, and then got Dan involved when they were in severe financial difficulties back in the early 30s. And those two people, Wilson and my dad, really, I guess you could say, saved Chautauqua, because they put it into receivership and got it straightened around.
How did your dad become so interested in St. Bonaventure?
That's interesting. We had a client in Bradford named Hugh Grant, who was Greg, you're a baseball aficionado. Hugh Grant was a scion, you would say, S-C-I-O-N.
Mhm.
His father had made some money in the oil business around Bradford. Hugh, he'd gone to Georgetown and a good Catholic upbringing. And then the oil business was sold. I mean, he sold the oil business. I guess his father died. I never knew his father. And he sold it back in the mid or late 30s for, what was in a huge amount. I don't remember, $5 million, I mean. And but he was so he was out of the oil business, and he'd always had an interest in horses. So he got into the trotting business big time. I mean, he at one time owned scores, if not hundreds, of trotters, racehorses. I mean, he had his own trainer and all that stuff. And a very nice guy, and very, very loyal to Georgetown. In fact, there's a chair there in the medical school that he endowed. But
Hugh Grant.
Hugh Grant. Well, he was interested in all kinds of sports. And after World War II, it must have been 48 or 49, you guys know John Yackham.
Mm-hmm.
John had owned the Falcons, and quite an enterprising guy. And he and my father, I don't remember the details, but the Washington Senators were for sale somehow. And I don't know how John got it. Oh, John had worked for Branch Rickey.
Mm-hmm.
And you've probably gotten his history. And Mr. Rickey, as he always called him. And so he knew baseball, and he knew all the people and the then big shots in baseball. And anyway, I don't know whether he got an option or something. Anyway, so they needed some money. I mean, so they got Hugh Grant involved, and they bought the Washington Senators. And
You know this story? Did you?
Yeah, you probably talked to
Yeah,
John.
yeah.
And I don't know, remember how long that lasted. They didn't make out too well with it. That was...
Well, you filled in a piece here I didn't know.
Yeah.
John had an option to purchase 40%
Yeah.
from an estate.
Yeah, that was it. That was it.
Clark Griffith was
Griffith, yeah.
still the majority stockholder.
Mhm.
And somehow John had worked his way as a
Yeah.
young guy to sell the franchise here to the Detroit Tigers, got some money there.
Yeah.
They needed extra money to conclude the option.
Yeah.
He
That's
did
what
so,
I
and
did,
that, so
right.
you tell me how the financing worked.
Yeah.
John bought
He
it.
came to my father, who he had known slightly, and said, "I need some money," or something like that. Who do you know? Or,
Yeah.
and Dad got Hugh Grant involved. Okay, go ahead.
So that's how your dad became interested in St. Bonaventure then?
Well, and Hugh Grant, a good Catholic,
Right.
although he went to Georgetown, he didn't go to Bonaventure. Yeah, we started out talking about this. Had a sister named Agnes Wise, and she was an ardent. I never met her, but she did have a big interest in Bonaventure. And so my father, for some reason, got interested in old books and manuscripts, and when he'd come across one, if he couldn't afford it, why he'd talk to Hugh Grant and say, "Well, why don't you buy this and donate it to Bonaventure in the name of Agnes Wise?" So they started doing that. So my father got to
That's
know
great.
Wow.
people in Bonaventure, and eventually became a trustee of Bonaventure. In fact, vice chair, I think, at one
Yeah.
point. And he started the Sally Lasser collection down there. And if you've never seen this rare book, Bonaventure has some good stuff, including a Gutenberg Bible.
Okay.
Well, he gave him a lot of this,
Yeah,
too.
a lot of which
Yeah.
he gave, and a lot of which he got Hugh Grant to
Yeah,
give.
Yeah.
And in fact, Hugh Grant died, it must be 15 years ago. And his widow was a very fine person. I don't know if she's still alive, but Bonaventure, of course, tried to keep her interested, but she wasn't particularly interested in Bonaventure, so that's not.
I sidetracked you here.
Not at all.
Sorry.
But I'll just quickly conclude the Occam story. And John, by the way, is
Yeah,
coming
I'm
to town
sorry.
on February 22nd.
Yeah, I see that.
He's going to be honored at
Yeah.
the Chicago Sports Hall.
Well, he should be.
Yeah. Quite a guy, isn't he?
Quite a
Yeah.
guy.
You know, he's one of these guys, I don't see him for 10 years.
Yeah.
And it's just like, hey, Bill,
Yeah.
great to see you.
You
You
see
know,
him
and
in the
I saw him
summer.
yesterday, you know. It's amazing. I never
Yeah.
had any great, I know he was a dear friend
No,
of my
he's-
dad, but
He's a real name
He's
dropper,
quite a
but he's
guy.
a genuine person, too.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
He is a name dropper, and frankly, when you hear it, you say, "Oh, can't be." And in
Yeah.
reality, it is.
Yeah. No, that's right.
You know, that's the amazing part.
The
You're
only
talking about-
time,
you talk about name droppers, you know, it was always kind of a joke in the Bar Association after Justice Jackson died, you know, that talking about name droppers. Oh, you're from Well, I practiced law with Bob Jackson. If you were in the same building, you practiced law with Justice Jackson. You were across the street, I think.
the only person that I could remember John Yocum saying he'd never met, I mean, of that era, was Frank Sinatra. Or maybe he'd met him, but he never claimed any
Friendship, huh?
particular friendship with him. Yeah.
Well, anyways, the Occam story.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Clark Griffith didn't want anything to do with Yacom.
Yeah.
Clark had 50. Well, actually, he had 40%. Yacom had 40%, but there was a swing 20%.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they had a big power play in Washington, and the long and the short of it, they forced Yacom out after
Yeah.
8 months of
Yeah.
ownership. And he made a couple bucks.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, he went on from there. And
Yeah.
did all right.